The Hurricane was a very comfortable aircraft to fly. Of course, when we converted from Harvards, the Harvards were an American aircraft where a lot of the workings of the thing were electrically done, whereas the Hurricane was pneumatic and hydraulic. One very big difference we found was the braking system. On the Harvard you got two things like shovels that you put your foot on, and you also got the rudder bar. So you would land using the rudder bar mostly, and then you'd move your feet up to the shovels to start using brake. On the Hurricane, you just had one rudder bar with two positions on it. You could get your feet up higher or lower down, and the brake was a hand brake. You had a sort of spade at the top. It wasn't the pole, it was a spade. You had your firing button on that as well, but because I think I always got the idea that the Brits designed an aeroplane, and once it was all together, they suddenly felt, oh wait, we've got to put somebody into that thing. So they got the smallest person they could find who went, and you got into the thing. And so the stick, or the control column, to use the correct term I suppose, stayed vertical, and it was the top segment that moved, because there was not enough movement either way, so you just had the top bit which moved around like that. And it was similar with the Spitfire. The Hurricane, I mean, thinking of it, a big humpback sort of aeroplane compared to the Harvard, but it was very nice for takeoff. Contrary to the later models of Spit, you could look over the nose when you took off. The later models of Spit, if you tried to do that, you wrote off about 9 inches of your prop. So the thing was that getting into it for the first time, the instructor sat you down, blindfolded you, after you'd had a good look around the cockpit, and said, put your hand on this, put your hand on that. And once you were completely proficient at that, then they started instructing you on the actual flying capabilities of it. It was very necessary, because there's no time in the air to hunt around looking for things. You've got to know where they are. You must know that you put your hand there, the throttle, the pitch lever is there, and you're starting and you're priming. You've got to know where these things are. And so that was a major portion of starting to fly the Hurricane. Once they explained, you did a couple of circuits, you flew around, got the feel of the aircraft. It was a very steady aircraft, not twitchy at all. The Spit was very twitchy fore and aft, but one of the things we found interesting, well, in a warped sort of way I think, was that down here, just below your hips, was like the gearbox system of a motor car. Sort of, you had up and down on the one side, and that was flaps. You had a neutral position, and you had up and down on the other side for your wheels, your undercarriage. Now the snag there was that when your aircraft was on the ground, there was a little spring-loaded arm which came along and locked your wheels down, so nobody could get into the cockpit, kick this thing, and suddenly find the wheels folding up under them. But the interesting thing is it was very stiff to work. Now, it was down there, so you put your hand down, you're flying the thing, you've got off the ground, you've now got to get your boots up. So you select up, and they don't come up, and you battle, so you take it back to neutral, and back further, and then try to pull it up, during which time that emergency clip jumps into position. So you can't move the thing up. So now you have to look down, move the little lever, and then shadow. Now the other snag was that it was a little lever with a knob on the top, and your elbow is trying to find some sort of purchase so that you can force the thing up. And invariably it was on the seat lowering mechanism with a little button at the top, and you would suddenly find and you go to the bottom, the cockpit was sort of sitting over there. And also you could usually tell when a person was on his first couple of solos, because he'd get off the ground and he'd be doing this, and your hand works in the opposite way. When you do this, somehow or other, you've had to change hands from the left to the right hand side anyway. So you're flying the machine with the left. So you do this, you pull the thing back, and suddenly you hear the noise is dropping, and you look around and your nose is up there. So you stuff the stick forward, and your engine immediately cuts, because you've got a float carburetor, and the G-force forces it up, the little needle goes in, and your engine is starved of petrol. So then you do this in a hurry, so you would see this going on, and little puffs of black smoke, almost like ack from behind it as this happened. So it was, let's say, a rather interesting period, that, just getting used to the Hurricane. But that almost always was a very difficult thing to work. You got used to it eventually, unless you got a really sticky one, and then you finished up at the bottom of the cockpit again. The instrument panel, most aircraft I flew had a standard panel. You had your main panel, which had got your airspeed indicator on it, your altimeter, your turn and slip, and certain instruments which were constant in more or less whatever aircraft you flew. The Americans had much the same thing, but they had bigger and smaller things. We had an altimeter where one of the people said was that, you know, I was flying in cloud and suddenly I got nothing on the clock except the maker's name, and that sort of thing. But the Hurricane itself was a lovely machine. The back portion, of course, was wooden strips covered with fabric, so it could take a fair amount of hammering. The cockpit cover, the hood or the canopy, slid backwards and forwards, which was a very useful thing. It had notches in the rim of the thing so that you could set your canopy, because if you didn't close it properly, the wind would tend to drift the thing back on you, so you had clips at these.